So a lot of people, I know when they stop eating gluten, all of a sudden their autoimmune disease goes away. Could be psoriasis, could be rheumatoid arthritis in adults. So, and sometimes Hashimoto's goes away. And so why is it that one gluten causes so many different problems? Maybe it's not gluten. Gluten may be just opening up the gut, and then things starts leaking depending on your microbiome and depending on the toxins that are there. So whatever is in the gut has to stay in the gut. And so, but when it comes out, it causes like a myriad of symptoms.
Welcome to the Radical Health Rebel podcast. I'm your host, Lee Brandon. This work started for me several decades ago when I started to see the impact I could make on people, helping them to identify the root cause of their health problems that no doctor could figure out, including serious back, knee, shoulder and neck injuries, acne and eczema issues, severe gut health problems, even helping couples get pregnant after several IVF treatments had failed. And it really moves me to be able to help people in this way. And that is why I do what I do and why we have this show. In this week's episode, Tetyana Obukhanych, immunologist and gut health expert, shares both her scientific expertise and personal journey with chronic gut health issues. She explores how vaccines, glyphosate, and gluten impact the gut and immune system, and explains the difference between IgE and non-IgE allergies. Tetyana also opens up about her struggles with chronic fatigue and gut dysfunction, and how dietary changes and alternate day fasting played a key role in her healing. The conversation covers time-restricted eating, metabolic individuality, fasting for women, exercise, hormone balance, and how fasting can rejuvenate gut stem cells. She offers practical, science-based advice for incorporating fasting in a way that supports gut and overall health. Tetyana Obukhanych, welcome to the Radical Health Rebel podcast. It's great to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. And, we spoke a little while ago before you came on. And, the reason I know about you is because of your book that you wrote many years ago, which we won't be talking about today. But you're free to mention it at any point if you want. But it is a fantastic book, and that's kind of why I reached out to you. But we're going to have a slightly different conversation today. But to start us off, so the audience can get to know you a little, Tetyana, can you share your extensive academic and professional journey?
Well, I'm actually going to make it really brief because I just like brevity. So for the purposes of this podcast, all we need to know about my education is that I have a degree in biochemistry, bachelor's degree, and a PhD in immunology. And from there, people can probably guess what kind of qualifications I have. And if anybody is wondering about my accent, I can say I was born in Ukraine, but then I came to the United States to pursue my education.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, obviously I'm aware of your academic background, and it is pretty extensive. So it's great to have you on the show. So to move things on, would you be willing to share a little bit about your own journey with regards to gut health issues that you've had?
Okay. Yeah, so the gut was always my weakest point, and of course, anything else is going to make it even weaker. And so when I was in graduate school, I started experiencing pain in the gut, periodic pain. And I didn't really know what it was caused, so I kind of lived with that. It wasn't very pleasant. It was recurrent. I didn't know what to do about it. Doctors just said it's just gas, but I knew it's not gas because it was something different. And then probably I stayed with that for a decade or so. And once I became a mom, I started researching a certain subject, like for children's health, and that is vaccines. And I started just looking into vaccine ingredients. And what really attracted my attention is that some vaccines were made in baker's yeast. So they use baker's yeast, the same yeast that we use for bread baking that grows on grapes. And they just use that as a microorganism to put certain vaccines into, and that is hepatitis B vaccine and HPV. And so, but then what ends up being in the mix of that vaccine is not only the hepatitis B vaccine antigen, from the virus, but also a lot of yeast protein. And I was wondering, okay, so if the vaccine can make you immune or raise the antibodies against the intended antigen, against the viral antigen, if there is some other contaminants in there, wouldn't it also kind of sensitize you to those contaminants? And then it occurred to me, okay, so I actually received that vaccine as a graduate student, hepatitis B, because I was in immunology program and we had to do rotations in different labs. And one of the labs is where we had to work with human blood. So it was recommended to take all the vaccines and precautions, which I did. I was very compliant with all recommendations at that time. Now I'm no longer, following the rules to the T. And then after that, I started having that pain, right? So then I thought, okay, what if I exclude all yeast from my diet? And that would include nutritional yeast, bread, obviously, grapes, and any other sources that I could think of. And I had like 1 month without the pain. So the pain went away. And I was like, oh, I think, yeah, that is. So, but let me reintroduce to make sure that is the thing. So then I got myself a scoop of nutritional yeast. And lo and behold, 3 days later, the pain is back. And so to explain what kind of pain it is, it's not like when you're bloated or this kind of general tummy ache. The pain was very particular. It was like a rototiller going through your guts and scraping from inside. So yeah, kind of nasty. Not enough to go to rush to the hospital, but it certainly limits your quality of life. And when that comes on, I have to pretty much lay down and wait until it's gone before I can do something. And if it, happens when I'm out, it's very unpleasant to go through your life with that. But then I discovered this, cause. And for me, to be free of this pain, I just had to exclude some foods from my diet, which is, of course, unfortunate because you have to limit your diet in certain ways. But, it's either that or suffering with the pain. But then, this is what I learned, that certain vaccines are going to affect your gut health. And if you know vaccine ingredients, it could be a good starting point to start guessing what to eliminate, because otherwise you can try to guess a lot of things, eliminate a lot of things unnecessarily. But this gives you some guess list to start with.
Yeah, it's interesting. I have a family member that has a nut allergy. And I know that in certain vaccines, they put, it used to be peanut oil, didn't it, that they would put in certain vaccines. And then we've had an explosion in peanut allergies over the last 20, 30 years.
So I don't know necessarily that modern vaccines have that. I think it has been there in the 60s might be, but I'm not sure that that adjuvant is being approved and used right now in new vaccines. But certainly you could get gut allergies or gut allergies from food exposures from different sources, not only from vaccines. So I wouldn't say you blame everything on vaccines, but that is one cause that is worth to be aware
of. Yeah, it's interesting. It makes sense, doesn't it? If there's things in there to cause an immune response, you would it would be a logical thought process to think, well, you could be responding to anything that's in that, right?
Yeah. But you know what? I would like to distinguish between two types of allergies, because what you mentioned, that anaphylaxis, it's a very typical allergy that the doctors are aware of, and they usually measure if people might have something like that when they measure antibodies of the IgE type. So if you have IgE antibodies for peanut antigen, then you might be sensitive for that. The kind of allergy that I have, and it's a totally different type of allergy, which they're now only discovering. It's called non-IgE GI food allergy. So it's this long name, and you cannot discover it with antibodies. So if I would go to the doctor and say, okay, I think I might have an allergy to yeast, can you measure it? They would measure my blood, and find nothing and say, no, you're fine. Go ahead and keep eating yeast. But this particular type of allergy is T-cell mediated. So you can't really measure it, and it's in the gut. It's local to the gut. They have some lymphoid tissue in the gut. And so it's basically, you had to do something more invasive, like biopsies and endoscopies. And there is actually a condition that is known to associated with food allergy, and it's called lymphoid nodular hyperplasia. Okay, so that's like a complicated name. And it's when in the gut you have these lymphoid tissues, which everybody has, but in those who have this condition, they would be enlarged. So they would be like much bigger than normal. And so the telltale signs of this condition is, if you read reviews, recurrent abdominal pain. And that's actually a mild form of the disease. And the next stage would be bloody diarrhea. So I didn't get the second one, I didn't get the severe form. I got the mild form. But I'm thinking, children receive this vaccine when they're infants. And they may not necessarily develop the symptoms of this until they start getting solids, until they start like 1 year old and they start eating bread or, little crackers. Then they're exposed to disease, but immunologic memory is formed already from those 3 shots that they receive for hepatitis B in like first half year of their life. So this disease might come in, or this condition might come later, and it will not be associated with, because we always think about something like, oh, you just did that, and then the symptoms come on. And so a wrong association might be made with a different vaccine or with something else. And like it would really complicate figuring out what's really, what's like this sequence of events that leads to this recurrent pain. And obviously, preverbal babies, they can't really tell you how they feel. And so it would be just behavior, right? They would be, it's very hard to go with that pain and behave normally. Kids wouldn't do that.
But in your case, it was specifically yeasts.
Yeah. So it was specifically yeast, because that's what I kind of made a really good correlation with. And interestingly, if I were to eat bread made with sourdough, I would not have that pain. So sourdough is a different kind of yeast, or like it's more like more wild yeast or a mixture of yeasts. But when the bread is made specifically with baker's yeast, which is Saccharomyces cerevisiae, that's the scientific Latin name for that immediately does that. Yeah.
That's interesting. It's interesting. Yeah, I mean, I've heard so many times doctors say to my clients, "Oh, you're not sensitive to gluten," but they tend to only be aware of IgE responses, and they're not aware of what we call non-celiac gluten sensitivities. But again, that's not exactly what you were talking about. Although I guess it would come under that umbrella.
Yeah.
Because obviously I'm talking about antibody responses like IgG, for instance. But what you're talking about is a T cell mediated response, which, it makes complete sense, but it's not something that I've looked into a lot myself. It's interesting.
I can give you some references, some papers to look into that. And another thing that, for me, it was yeast antigen, but for kids, most often it's a milk antigen. And because we also have casein residue in some vaccines, so the mechanism of that would be similar, and it's the same similar gut issues, gut pain, nothing much on the skin, not necessarily eczema, not, any anaphylaxis, but that particular gut allergy.
Yeah, you just made me think about something, actually. So the other thing as well, it's quite a big thing in the news at the moment, but when I did some research, actually it's 5 years ago, the MMR vaccine has glyphosate in it, right? And now I know on its own, it's a bad enough substance, just to be in our food supply. But the fact that it's in a vaccine as well, that's now got me thinking, could that have made the situation even worse? Because if children are getting injected with that, now the body is potentially responding, in a greater way than it possibly would before. Have you got a view on that? Amanda spent 19 years battling severe IBS, diarrhea, and abdominal pain. Her life was ruled by public toilets, and she avoided holidays for fear of flare-ups. Doctors offered no solutions, just endless Imodium. After working together, Amanda discovered the root causes of her symptoms, and in just 3 months, she was IBS-free. She even booked her first holiday with her husband, a dream come true. If you're struggling like Amanda, visit www.bodycheck.co.uk to schedule your consultation. Let's find the root cause and get your life back.
So glyphosate is a very small molecule, and the immune system usually disregards small molecules. So glyphosate, it's no bigger than an amino acid. So I don't think there is like necessarily an immune response to that, unless, so the only exception to that would be if that glyphosate molecule is somehow absorbed to a bigger carrier.
Right.
Then it might be. So, but I don't know if that happens, or the glyphosate in vaccines or in our food is just kind of free floating. It's not really absorbed to anything bigger than that. But let's talk about glyphosate and its effect on gut microbiome, because that's also very much related to gut health. So obviously that would come from whatever food that we're eating that has been treated with glyphosate. And not only it does something to, as a herbicide, we know it actually selectively kills some of the bacteria. But there are some other bacteria that are resistant. In those that are resistant, it's E. coli and Prevotella. So when we consume glyphosate, we kill off some good bacteria and we have overgrowth of E. coli and Prevotella. And these particular bacteria, they have a certain endotoxin which is very inflammatory. There are other bacteria which have an endotoxin which is actually anti-inflammatory, and usually that's what we had with our normal gut biome. But these two, they are very inflammatory. And so when you eat gluten, in addition to having that already pre-selected inflammatory microbiome, gluten opens your tight junctions, right? It regulates zonulin and it makes things leak into your bloodstream. And then you have that inflammatory endotoxin leaking into your bloodstream. So what you have systemic inflammation. You could have autoimmune diseases, psoriasis could be related to that, and many other things. So a lot of people, I know, when they stop eating gluten, all of a sudden their autoimmune disease goes away. Could be psoriasis, could be rheumatoid arthritis in adults. So, and sometimes Hashimoto's goes away. And so why is it that one gluten causes so many different problems? Maybe it's not gluten. Gluten may be just opening up the gut, and then things starts leaking depending on your microbiome and depending on the toxins that are there. So whatever is in the gut has to stay in the gut. And so, but when it comes out, it causes like a myriad of symptoms.
Yeah, interesting. So you mentioned, when you were in the immunology program, you were required to receive vaccines. Did you notice any health changes after that?
Yeah, so that was this gut-related pain issue.
Okay.
Yeah, I didn't notice really any other issues immediately, but over time, and I think other things added up to that, is I started experiencing chronic fatigue. And I think I wouldn't necessarily blame this vaccine on that. Maybe it added something, right, because it would affect the integrity of the gut. But over time, then I had some infections. Then, pregnancy also takes a lot out of you nutritionally. By the end of that, I was just I wouldn't call it chronic fatigue syndrome because I didn't go to receive official diagnosis, but it was a pretty severe chronic fatigue in the way that even like walking 20 minutes outside, I would have to come back and take a nap. I was that weak. And of course, you cannot really do much. There isn't much clarity, very difficult to do any tasks. So I would still, keep up with my life, and on the outside, people wouldn't know. But I know how difficult it was just to go through life with that. So so that was another thing that creeped up eventually that I had to deal with. And in the past 3 years, I really dealt with that pretty good.
So was the fatigue after you had children, or did that start before?
It was kind of gradual, so you can't really say when exactly it started. It's not like one day I crashed. So it was like a gradual build up and one thing after another. And eventually you attribute it, difficulties like with metabolism during pregnancy, this and that. But after childbirth, I wasn't the same person as before.
Yeah, interesting. So you made changes to your diet.
Yeah, so this was one way that I wanted to go. And, when you talk to friends and you have a lot of friends who are in the medical field or nutritionists, they will kind of diagnose you. Oh, you might have thyroid issue. Oh, you might have adrenal fatigue. Oh, you might have SIBO. Okay, I may have all of that, but even if I go and get a diagnosis, it's then I have to go with some kind of medical recommendation. And I thought, okay, I'm done with that. Even if I know the diagnosis, I would probably not do the conventional stuff anyway. So why bother knowing the diagnosis? So instead, I turned to trying to figure out the nutrition for myself. And at that time, ketogenic diet was already getting popular. So I tried that, and it really helped. So it really took me out of this fatigue. But then I couldn't really stay for too long on that because it's not really my type. My body needed something else. But I think the crucial point was to just exclude carbs that are high glycemic index carbs. So that's what I noticed. So that was something that was keeping me in that chronic fatigue. And then I think what ketogenic diet did is that when we have ketones in our body, it's not only used for energy, but ketones are extremely anti-inflammatory, and they have a myriad of other properties. And so that anti-inflammatory property might have healed a few things. So that was the first step in my recovery. And then I went a little further. So maybe we can talk about that.
Yeah, before we go there, so what you've just described in terms of, eating a keto type diet, when I think, okay, you're from the Ukraine, so I'm guessing your ancestors were from that part of the world. My ancestry predominantly from the UK. So, okay, it's probably I'm guessing it's colder in Ukraine generally than the UK.
No, not necessarily, because you have a marine climate, and deep there it's a continental climate, so it could be much colder, even though it's more to the south.
But I guess the point I was trying to make is we're both North European genetics, if you like. And when you look back over many years, you think, well, how would our ancestors have eaten?
Yeah.
Well, my ancestors would have had snow on the ground for probably 2 or 3, 4 months of the year. They wouldn't have been eating oranges and bananas, right?
Yep.
So certainly for the winter months, they would have been eating predominantly, if not exclusively, an animal-based diet. And when it gets to summertime, they probably would have fattened up eating fruit and vegetables, particularly fruit, so they could survive the winter. And I guess in Ukraine, it would probably be similar environment. Would that be right?
It would be similar for any Paleolithic time, right? Before agriculture came in and there was no grain, people just were not eating carbs, right? So it was just, like you said, meat, whatever they could hunt in the winter, and in the summer, whatever they could gather, which would be just berries, mushroom, whatever fruit that they can have. So so that was our diet of our really, really distant ancestors. And then once agriculture came in, I'm pretty sure that some societies did adapt to that. So, for example, Mediterranean types, I think they could thrive on carbs, not necessarily refined carbs, right? But on good quality complex carbs. Whereas some of us may be better with more ancient Paleolithic, type of diet. And I'm not necessarily trying to put myself in a specific diet and say, oh, I'm only eating Paleolithic according to these rules. I'm just saying I see what my body needs, and then I adjust to that.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of what I do when I'm working with clients. I help them find out what works for them, because there's definitely no one size fits all diet right now. I've had people, I've never taken anyone to carnivore, and I've never taken anyone to vegetarian. I always find that people are somewhere in the middle. And obviously, generally, the colder the climate, the more animal-based they tend to need, and the more equatorial, shall we call it, the more plant-based they generally need, and we're all different. Have you heard of metabolic typing?
I've heard of something similar, which is ANS typing. ANS stands for autonomic nervous system, but I think it's like this is pretty similar concept. And so, yeah, I wanted to mention this book, Nutrition and the Autonomic Nervous System by Nicholas Gonzalez. So I discovered the book a bit later after I was on ketogenic diet. And that book was really enlightening because it gives you 10 types according to your autonomic nervous system balance, whether you're sympathetic dominant, parasympathetic dominant, or balanced, or somewhere in between, like moderate, this and that. And so where that book placed me and what kind of diet that they said would be best for my type was exactly what we eat in Ukraine, which is basically meat, but not too much meat like we've eaten every other day. It was sort of that kind of rule. And lots of root vegetables and cruciferous. And that's that's exactly what I had in Ukraine. So that was like a really, that was an indication that this book is onto something because like it kind of clicks. And another thing that this book explained to me, which no other book could, when I was taking magnesium supplement, it was really bad for me. Like it made my fatigue even worse. It dropped my blood pressure from what it was like already low to like super low. And everybody is praising magnesium supplements, right? They say, oh, you need magnesium. You're always deficient on magnesium. And even some doctor friend recommended magnesium because I also was having muscle cramps or something like that. So, okay, take magnesium. So I took magnesium. That went away. But I go back to him, talk back to him and say, well, now I have really, really low blood pressure, which is much worse than right? So I said, oh, yeah, magnesium can lower blood pressure. Well, that was like really bad for me. But this book explained that parasympathetic dominant people, which I am, should not be taking magnesium because magnesium kills you. I wouldn't say kills, but it kind of lowers your sympathetic tone even more. And I already didn't have enough of that. But of course, yeah, for people who are sympathetic dominant, magnesium would be a great thing. So now you start seeing how nutrition has to be personalized, and you can get like a wrong healthy diet, and that will make you really feel really bad. So you have to know what is your own healthy diet.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's interesting. I just remember we did actually speak about this briefly when we spoke before. And what's interesting, so in metabolic typing, you've got the autonomic nervous system. So you've got your parasympathetic dominant, sympathetic dominant, and then you've got your balance types in the middle. But in metabolic typing, you also have the oxidative system. So you've got fast oxidizers, slow oxidizers, and mixed in between. And in metabolic typing, what it suggests is that some people's autonomic nervous system is dominant, and in others, it's the oxidative system that's dominant, and you need to find out which one of the two. So, I mean, I would guess you're probably the same as me, but so my dominant is actually the oxidative system, and I'm a fast oxidizer. And even within autonomic nervous system, I'm parasympathetic dominant as well, which either way, the diet's very similar. It's very, very much animal-based, and then a little bit plant-based. But again, even within that, there's lots of individuality as well, variance in terms of fats, proteins, and carbohydrates and what people need. But yeah, I think the concept is very similar between, the book that you're discussing and metabolic typing. Seems very, very similar. I keep trying to get Bill Walcott on the show, but keeps putting me off. He's got a project he's been working on for about 12 years. So he said he'll come on when he's finished it. So you started changing your diet. How quickly did you start to see results?
Within a couple of months, I think that was a big difference. Yeah. And before I did that, I also helped myself a little bit with an adaptogenic herb, which was rhodiola, which is known in the field that it's supposed to help adrenals. And that did improve me some. So I could see the effect already. But it was like dropping carbs that really made it further. And so another reason why I couldn't go on the ketogenic diet for too long, or like I just didn't want, like I felt great in terms of my energy, but I was just losing a lot of weight. And so that was like, I needed to kind of stop and rethink what I'm doing. And so the reason I was losing a lot of weight is because on ketogenic diet, I mean, that would probably be true for others, we don't stimulate insulin that much, right? If you don't have any carbs, protein does stimulate a little bit of insulin, and fat, dietary fat doesn't stimulate insulin. And it's insulin that helps you make fat. It's actually a lipogenic hormone. And so if you don't have insulin at all, like for a long time, then so some people, that could be a goal, right? If they're hyperinsulinemic, they would be, oh yeah, this is a good way to lower it. But for those who go to the other end of the equation, then you kind of need to keep your fat, right? To some degree, right? You can't lose all of it. So I had to figure out what do I do in the long term? Like, I need to have some fat as well, and also not be on a carb diet all the time, because that would probably put me back into that tired state. So at that time, I discovered books by Jason Fung, and he's all into fasting. So that's a big difference. So the difference between calorie restriction and fasting is a huge difference. So I started reading on the fasting, and that kind of clicked with me too, because one of my grandmother was into fasting. So I remember that from the childhood. And I remember that her state of health was much better than any of my other grandparents. She lived the longest, and she was very active, agile, and lived into long old age, whereas others have died much earlier, either from cancer or from heart attack, or those kind of things. So yeah, I started looking into that. And what I also realized is that certain fasting strategies are good for improving your gut health as well.
So what did you actively seek fasting, or was there something that was there an event, a moment that kind of struck your curiosity? Meet Julie, a 47-year-old working in computer sales who had been battling lifelong IBS. She suffered from severe abdominal pain, bloating, and frequent loose stools, low energy, brain fog, and hot flashes, all of which affected her work and quality of life. After thorough testing, we discovered the root causes: parasite infection, bacterial overgrowth, leaky gut, low digestive enzymes, and a vegetarian diet high in oxalates. With a tailored plan, Julie made dietary changes, added targeted supplements to balance her gut microbiome, and supported her digestion with prebiotics, probiotics, and enzymes. The results? Well, in Julie's words, the improvement is staggering. Her pain and bloating vanished, her energy levels soared, her brain fog and hot flashes disappeared, and her immune system became stronger than ever. If you're struggling with IBS or gut health issues, reach out today for a consultation at www.bodycheck.co.uk, and let's uncover the root cause and create a plan to transform your health.
Oh, so with fasting, it's not just fasting, it's fasting and feasting, right? So you alternate between days that you fast and the days where you eat according to your metabolic type, and it doesn't have to be restricted. So it's this contrast. And then as I adopted this lifestyle and started seeking sort of scientific explanation for what's going on, I found some interesting results that show you that we have two sets of genes, or like master regulator genes. And one set of gene is about proliferation, cell division, and another set of genes is about self-recycling, self-clearing, the debris, some proteins that are no longer functional. And you need to go between these two states for cellular health. And so you activate one set of genes when you eat, especially protein and also carbohydrates, to stimulate your insulin. And the other set of genes is when you fast, you activate that. And so this is how our ancestors probably also did that, because there were times of scarcity and times of abundance. And so maybe this is how we evolved. This is the same in animal kingdom, right? There are some times when, like bears, they hibernate, right? So there's a huge time when they're actually fasting. Now, for us, we don't really have to do extensive fasts to get into that. It's not like you have to fast for a month. But Jason Fung, he described this interesting approach, which is, of course, not his own, but something that he adopted. It's called ADF, Alternative Day Fast. And in the beginning, I thought it's too much. It's like every other day. It seemed a little bit strange, like I wouldn't jump into it right away. So I tried other things like time-restricted eating, or maybe just fasting once a week. And those, I just didn't resonate with me. So then I just jumped into this ADF called Turkey, and it turned out to be the best for some reason. And so why I think it's the best is because when we fast and feast so closely to each other, our genes kind of stay on from both sides. So it's like, because they kind of know, like, you have to rely on them soon again, and they don't get downregulated. But if you were to be feasting for like a month or even a week, those fasting genes, they will kind of get downregulated, and it could be hours, if not days, to bring them up in expression. But if you do it like really often, it's very easy to go through the fasting and feasting day, and it's almost doesn't feel like anything.
So what was your experience like? How did you notice health changes when you started doing that alternate day fasting?
Yeah, so alternate day fasting gave me even more energy than I had before. So to the extent that I can actually jog in the morning, which in the past I couldn't even think about. It was just totally not in my plans or, ambitions. Like, I couldn't imagine myself doing something like that. But now it's like I'm basically getting more and more functional to the degree where I can even pursue some kind of fitness. Yeah, before that was off the table.
Yeah, and again, if you look back, if you think, again, how did we evolve? There's a good chance that, one day you go out and hunt and the hunt is successful, right? So you get to eat that day. And then the next day, the hunt isn't successful, right?
Yeah.
So it's a good chance that, again, that might completely fit how we used to live, let's say a few thousand years ago, but when there are still hunter-gatherers now in places like some places in Africa. And what's quite interesting, if you go and study those people, they're generally very healthy.
Yeah,
They
because
don't.
and we probably share genetics. Like, that kind of early lifestyle shaped our genetics and shaped our requirements. And so we kind of have to try to recapitulate that, even though we usually hunt in the fridge or in the supermarket now. But, we have to kind of what the body gets and what the body is exposed to, that has to be maintained. Yeah, and it's scientifically known to provide health benefits. And I've seen that with my grandparent generation.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of talk about, stimulating autophagy, isn't there, when you're fasting? So it's clearing away all the debris. I mean, even to a degree, natural apoptosis as well. So, the cell death, if you like, of cells that are ready to go rather than hanging around. Yeah, it's interesting as you speak about, alternate day fasting, because I'm kind of thinking, okay, that's clearly worked for you. But from a point of biochemical individuality, I'm trying to think, would that work for everyone, or might the timings be slightly different for different people? I mean, obviously, if someone right now is eating 3 meals a day, 7 days a week, and I know you said you went cold turkey, but I think for a lot of people that would be quite a big jump, wouldn't it?
Yeah, so I could not start fasting right away, especially not. I tried it a long time ago because of the SIBO or potential SIBO. Somebody, fasting was one of the possibilities how to deal with that. I could not fast. Like, at some point, I just felt this feeling of hypoglycemia, and it's a horrible feeling. And when you feel it, like, you have to stop fasting. And I thought, like, my metabolism is so rusty that I just can't do it yet. But after I did that couple of months of keto, I think it's actually prepared me because, when we fast, we actually in the state of ketosis. And what happens is that instead of burning glucose or whatever food that comes in, we just burn our fat stores or fat mass. So it is kind of similar to a ketogenic diet. So that could be like a good first step. So I wouldn't recommend anybody to jump directly into a alternative day fast from from whatever diet they're doing now, because like that's just not possible metabolically. No, it's very tough. And after that, people would have to choose for themselves what they do. Some people go with TRE, and that's good enough for them. And some people might want to go deeper, or my husband jumped into a 5-day fast right away, and he could do it. So great for him, right? But he did it like once or twice, and that's it. And I would like that to be more of a of a lifestyle, something that I do on a regular basis and not just once in life. So but everybody would have to personalize it for themselves.
Yeah, you mentioned TRE. Can you explain what TRE is?
TRE is just a different way of fasting. TRE means time restricted eating. So you choose a time in the day. Usually, like they say, it's 16 to 8. So 16-hour fasting and 8-hour eating. And doesn't mean that you eat continuously for 8 hours, but you just put all your meals within that window. So let's say if you choose early TRE, let's say 8 a.m. is your first meal, then your last meal would be 2 p.m. or maybe 4 p.m. So there is like this window. So you don't eat late at night. And they did studies on early TRE versus late TRE for people who have prediabetes. So early TRE in their study was from 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. All the food is within that window. And then they did the other way around, from 2 p.m. to 8 p.m. So those who had early TRE, their pre-diabetes improved. Those who had late TRE, it got worse. So the moral of this story is that late TRE is not good. So you could actually do more harm to yourself than good if you do that. So if you skip breakfast, you know how like people sometimes do TRE without even calling it that, because they like skip breakfast and then they come back from work and they eat late dinner. That is not, that is shown in studies that it's just counterproductive. And it's probably because late in the evening, we have the glucose tolerance is actually worse. So glucose tends to stay longer in the bloodstream. And I think it's because there is an interaction between insulin and melatonin. And melatonin is actually inhibiting insulin. So you shouldn't be eating carb foods late at night, especially big meals with carbs. So early TRE was much better in a study on prediabetes. And similar kind of studies were done in women, those who have PCOS. This is basically another syndrome that's related to reproductive health. And again, it was shown that big breakfast in really tiny dinner worked to improve the hormones, but the other way around wasn't helpful.
Yeah, I mean, I've done more than one episode on PCOS on this podcast. And, one of the things I see a lot is women with PCOS, they also have acne as well. And again, we know that insulin can stimulate sebaceous glands. So there's your tie in there. Also, the same things that cause PCOS can cause acne as well. Just going back to time-restricted eating, it's quite interesting because at the moment, I eat at 11:30 in the morning and 4:30 in the afternoon. So I'm kind of in between early and late.
Yeah. Midday TRE was okay. Midday is fine in the studies.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, as you were speaking, I was thinking, maybe I should try earlier and just see what it's like. I mean, obviously my timing's quite short anyway. It's only like a 5-hour gap, and then I've got whatever it be, 19 hours where I generally don't eat. But I guess some people listening to this, especially, I'm quite active. I lift weights 3 times a week. I play tennis once or twice a week. I go for walks. Sometimes I do spin classes at the gym. And again, it's probably more of a guy thing. But if they were doing, alternate days fasting, I think the initial thought would be, but am I going to have enough energy to train on the days where I don't eat? Again, I don't know.
There's something you don't know, that when you're fasting, you actually have higher levels of epinephrine. And so the reason for that is because epinephrine, not only it is a sympathetic system hormone, fight and flight, but it's also metabolic hormone, because this is what's promoting lipolysis. So it acts as antagonist to insulin, and lipolysis is the first step in the breakdown of the fat mass that you have into, the triglycerides are being broken down into free fatty acids and glycerol. And so fatty acids go into your metabolism, and glycerol goes to make glucose again for your, blood sugar maintenance. But you actually, when you fast, you have higher levels. So you actually have more energy. And of course, if you don't experience that, that's probably, again, there could be some metabolic adjustments that you need to go through. But eventually, if you do it long enough, a month or so, eventually it has to be where you actually will be feeling much greater during a fasting date.
Yeah, it's interesting. It reminds me, I can't remember the guy's name. There's an Australian rugby player. I'm not sure if he's still playing or he's retired. But he fasts on the day that he plays. And he says he has more energy when he fasts than when he eats. Now, to me, that sounds really alien. But I'm also open to, well, why don't I try it and see, right?
Yeah.
And
The
again,
only thing that I could think about is that when you do endurance training, your muscle burns a lot of glucose, but then men have much more glycogen. So I think glycogen can sustain them through that 1 day of fast. Obviously, if you do 2 or 3 or 4, then you probably shouldn't be doing endurance training during extended fast. But we are talking about this very intermittent fast, right? It's like 1 day like this, 1 day like that. And even, if you want to make it less extreme, you could have the following regimen. It's like 1 day you do breakfast, lunch, and dinner, as you usually do. The next day you do only breakfast. And then you have 24 hours to the next breakfast. So it's also a fast. It's not 36 hours if you do like two nights and a day, but it's 24 hours. So you wouldn't run out of your glycogen necessarily if you need to maintain endurance training. But of course, everybody is different, so you have to adjust and see how you feel.
Yeah, that's interesting, because obviously I'm eating 2 meals a day in a short window. But what you're saying is potentially what you've just described, I could possibly take 1 meal from one day and put it in the other meal. So I'd be having 3, then 1, 3, then 1, rather than 2, 2, 2, 2. So I'd be eating the same amount of food.
But it's unevenly spread, and that could have benefits, right? Because that could actually give you that fluctuation between what I described in the past, mTOR dominant state, which is it's like an anabolic state, and AMPK dominant state, which is catabolic, which is when you are in that mode of autophagy, recycling, regeneration.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It does remind me, I'm going back to the 1990s now, and I used to read Fitness magazine, and I don't know why I remember this guy's name, but it was a Swedish guy. He was some kind of researcher, if I remember right. His name was Torbjörn Arkefeld. Now, why I remember his name, I don't know, but it really stands out. And what he suggested was, he was talking about getting as muscular and lean as possible. And what he was suggesting was, for 1 week, you eat a lot of food and carbs for a week, and you train really heavy. And then the following week, you eat the same amount of fat and protein, but you cut all the complex carbs out completely. And you train lighter for a fuller, wider range of motion. And what he was kind of suggesting is what you've just described. But I guess from what you've said, he probably wasn't quite right that in the fact that there probably wasn't really a fasting period. He was just talking about reducing the calories. Are you tired of just managing your chronic pain and ready to start actually overcoming it? I've created a powerful free guide called the Chronic Pain Breakthrough Blueprint, designed to help you uncover the hidden root causes of your pain and give you practical, holistic strategies to finally feel like yourself again. Whether you've been in pain for months or years, this guide will help you start asking the right questions, identify overlooked triggers, and take back control of your health one step at a time. It's completely free. Just hit the link in the show notes to download the Chronic Pain Breakthrough Blueprint today and take your first real step towards lasting relief.
Yeah. So look, I'm not necessarily saying that I'm right and nobody else is right, so there could be some advantages to what he was saying or to what he was doing, especially if empirically it was working for him. But this kind of, one catabolic and anabolic phase, this is something even that was mentioned for women. Like when I was still in Ukraine and I was adolescent, I was going to this program which was called Shaping. It was just a way to exercise for women, and they were tying it with the period. So, for example, they say the first 2 weeks of your cycle, we are in the follicular phase, that is catabolic phase. You do one set of exercises. Then the luteal phase, you eat very differently and you do a very different set of exercises because that is anabolic phase. And you kind of go between 2 weeks like this, 2 weeks like that. So obviously, yeah, there might be something to it that, that you can kind of separate, even have different diets on different times of the month. So yeah, and that program, I really loved it. And that was just one thing that I really missed that I had to quit in order to come to the United States to study because it was really keeping me in good shape, psychologically, with all the stress that I had to go through in the high school, right, in graduation, and all these exams. And yeah, it was supporting my mood, it was supporting my body, so it was a really great way of maintaining a lifestyle.
And how long ago was that?
Oh, it was when I was 17, so very long time ago.
Yeah, the reason I ask is because, that kind of philosophy, if you like, kind of shows like the Eastern Bloc countries were so far ahead of the Western countries in terms of training techniques and things like that. I'm not even sure how up to date a lot of Western sports teams are when it comes to training females. I mean, I know there's multiple reasons for it, but in soccer, for instance, there's a huge number of anterior cruciate ligament injuries in women, way, way higher than in men. And it does just make me wonder if they're taking into consideration the menstrual cycle when it comes to their training programs. Because I don't know. Maybe some are, maybe some aren't. But it does show how far ahead of the game, the Eastern Bloc countries were years ago.
Possibly. But, there's something that I noticed, and that was really weird in high school or like in school in general, that the teachers who were our PE teachers, and they were usually retired athletes, their state of health and their shape was so much worse than anybody else of their age. And I was wondering about that because when they are athletes, they have a certain way of nutrition and they eat a lot, right? And they actually do need carbs to do this glycogen load. They have to load their muscles with a lot of glycogen so that for endurance. And once they quit that very extensive, regimen of exercising and they go back to kind of sedentary life, it actually turns out worse for them than if somebody who was leading a sort of sedentary, average life the whole time. So yeah, I noticed they always get metabolic syndrome. They're more obese than, other population. And it's just once you go from the very active lifestyle to normal, Western lifestyle, you have to go into ketogenic diet. To me, it seems like you have to really drop the carbs at that point.
Yeah, I guess as well, if someone's competing at a high level, they're also living in a pretty high stress environment, physically from the training, it's very intense. But then there's also the mental stress as well of competing and trying to stay at a certain level, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, but that's when they quit that their health goes down after they quit.
Yeah. What I mean is they're kind of, if you like, they're creating a physiological debt, right?
Yeah.
Because they still look in shape. That's because they're doing so much exercise, burning the calories. But it's almost like once they stop, their body's just like, oh, right. Yeah. But really, what you're saying is they probably need to do what everyone else
Reconsider
is doing.
their metabolic requirements and be more strict. Maybe even go into fasting thing, regimens.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's down to drug use during sport as well. Might have weakened their system and messed up their hormonal system, etc. Just thinking more about people listening to this and they're thinking, oh, okay, yeah, it sounds quite interesting in terms of fasting. And I'm sure some of the listeners are already doing that anyway or already tried it. But I'm just thinking about someone who's, again, they're eating 3 meals a day. They've got 9-to-5 job. If they were going to move towards trying alternate day fasting, what for you would be perhaps the first step for those people?
So I think the first step would be to try to drop. The first step, of course, is going to try to do ketogenic diet just to make their metabolisms closer to what it would go through when fasting. So you already have upregulation of all these enzymes that are dealing with fat metabolism. So that would be first step. Then it would be reducing maybe one meal, like trying to go through a TRE type of diet. And that would have to be an evening meal that would have to be cut out. And I know it's so hard because evening meal is when the family is together and all of that. But again, remember, if you're going to do it another way around and like throw away breakfast and have a heavy dinner, it's like worse. It's better just stay where you are, right? So if it's possible to just, or at least eating that last meal earlier so that it's not being pushed. And eventually it will start kind of getting better and better, sort of like a snowball. You will just, your body will go in that direction. In the beginning, there will be resistance because your body is habituated to eating 3 meals a day. And so it will demand that. But as you start retraining your body, it will start demanding something else. And eventually, it will become easy to fast, and your body will even demand a fasting day. It's like, today I don't want to eat anything today, so I'm good.
Yeah, I guess the other thing, again, from a man, generally a man's point of view, is that I think the concern will be, but I'll lose muscle mass. Do you have a view
so
on
that concern was really well addressed by Jason Fung. He has like a really good blog on that, so I can just send you there because he shows all the science and all the measurements and actually both theoretical and actual measurements of people who fast. Then no, you don't lose lean mass. You actually lose fat mass, and they measure both and they see what's being used and what is not. So no. And so another thing that he says, the fat mass you regulate by fasting, eating or not eating, or also how much of insulin you stimulate. The lean mass you regulate by exercise. This is what builds your lean mass. If you don't exercise, you lose it. Or like if there is no gravity at all, right, in the space, then you also lose it.
Yeah, interesting. So with regards to fasting, is there anything perhaps that we haven't covered that you feel is really important to share with the audience?
Oh, yeah. So let's just talk about gut health since this is like the topic of the podcast. So there are a few studies that I recently found, which I was really excited about because those studies were talking about stem cells in the gut. And so you know how the gut has this one cell thick layer, which basically is responsible for absorption of foods, for secretion of various hormones, for immunologic function in the gut. And that layer is very vulnerable, right? Because it's only one cell thick. So it has to be replenished every 3 to 5 days almost. And it gets replenished through stem cells. So stem cells live right there deep in the crypts of the gut lining, and they have to constantly divide. And obviously, and when we have so much other damage from food allergens, from vaccines, whatever, we also kind of rely on the stem cells to repopulate and to regenerate the gut. But then as we age, the stem cells, they become diminished in numbers and then they don't divide so good. And so the researchers, they wanted to see what can rejuvenate that division, what can rejuvenate the stem cells in the gut. And they found that just 24 hours of fasting in mice was able to make these stem cells divide better and replenish the crypts of the gut much better with these specialized cells. So that's, here you have the fasting. Give your gut 24 hours of break, and your stem cells will actually perform better. And so why are they performing better? It's not because they are starving, it's because they are utilizing fatty acids. So they switch from glucose metabolism to fatty acid metabolism, and that switch is what miraculously make them more active. So that's one way to go. Then, in addition to that, some people say, well, you actually do, in order to fast, like you told me, you actually need longer than 24 hours. 24 hours is not really fasting. So there is another set of stem cells that are quiescent, that never really divide, and they are reserved for special occasions. And then we don't really tap into them if you're just continuously eating or fasting for a very short time, maybe. But a longer fast, and in mice it was 48 hours. I don't know how long it would be in humans, but we could assume similar. So there is this other compartment that gets activated. And that compartment is actually resistant to chemo and radiation at the time when it's quiescent. So maybe you heard the studies that if a person is fasting for 72 hours before they do chemo, they actually have less side effects from chemo, and then they rejuvenate their body much faster after the chemo. So they're tapping into this other quiescent stem cell compartment, which I believe would be not only in the gut, but also in the immune system, because, every system has its own stem cells. And the concept is the same. You have actively dividing stem cells that do routine maintenance, and you have the quiescent compartment, which can be brought up, and be functional. But usually it's not. But it's really great to have that reserve for when you have some kind of injury by toxin, by chemo, by radiation. After that, you can tap into that. And to do that, 48 hours of fast and refeeding was needed. So 2 steps, not just fasting. Obviously, at some point we will have a refeeding, right? So, and in those experiments, it was 2-day fast, 5-day refeeding. And I also heard about that particular fasting strategy, 5-2, right? So 5-day eating, 2-day fasting. 5-day eating, 2-day fasting. So with that, you're actually tapping into a different component of your stem cells for replenishment and rejuvenation and even restoration of the damage.
Yeah, and I guess you could mix things up as well, couldn't you? Like, for instance, you might do 3 weeks of alternate day fasting, and then you might do a week of 5-2, and then back. You can mix things up, then you're going to get almost all your bases covered, really.
Yeah.
So one of the things you mentioned there as well was, the studies were done on mice. It was 24 hours, 48 hours. Now, obviously, often when studies are done on mice, obviously mice have a shorter lifespan. We have much longer lifespan, and it's kind of compared in terms of lifespan. But I guess the other thing is a circadian rhythm is a circadian rhythm, right? That, a day is a day. But is there any studies on humans along a similar line, do you know, in terms of the timings?
Okay, so, the only thing that I've seen in terms of timing is good to have big breakfast and small dinner in terms of timing. And I think with humans, they don't really go too extreme on putting people onto these various diets, because usually these research subjects that get recruited into these studies, they're just regular people. They're not really adapted to fasting, and there might be poor compliance. Like, even if they get recruited, they may not stay on that regimen, right? Because it just they're not adjusted to that. So they do kind of milder studies, something that a regular person can handle. And yes, and it's known in circadian rhythm. So there are several ways that we can train our circadian rhythm. First, if one way is like you wake up and your eyes are exposed to the sunshine, right? And that immediately signals to the pineal gland to repress your melatonin, and you basically entrain your circadian rhythm that way. Another way, or maybe it's a different way, but for the gut system, you entrain it with the first meal. And of course, we need our liver and our pancreas and our stomach to work together. So they all have to comply to the same clock. And with your first meal is what entrains all these organs. So yeah, there is a recommendation that have a big breakfast and very, very small dinner or no dinner at all. Yeah, that's what it is. And in mice, one have to be careful with circadian rhythm studies because mice are nocturnal, so they eat differently, right? They eat during the night. That's their time.
Yeah, another thing that's just sprung to mind as well. So, when working with clients, I'm talking female clients, when they're fasting, what I've found is they find it more difficult to fast when they're premenstrual. Have you come across that at all?
Yeah, so we have to be aware of our hormones. And so one thing, it's like estrogen. One thing to know about estrogen is that it's really favoring insulin and disfavoring epinephrine. So during high estrogen times, which is ovulation, then you would not be able to do as much lipolysis. And but that lipolysis, so it's interesting how estrogen prevents lipolysis in certain tissues, especially in subcutaneous fat, but it doesn't prevent lipolysis from abdominal fat. So it's actually good because then you could still lose your abdominal fat, which is the bad fat. But once we are kind of low on our fat mass, I wouldn't want to do fasting during ovulation, during high estrogen times, because then you run out, you're not giving yourself glucose, right? And you also like low on your own fatty mass, then I don't want to go into a starvation phase, right? Because then there is no energy. In terms of premenstrual, like women would have to figure out it's the time when both hormones kind of go down. If it's hard to fast, then you have to adjust to that. But the best and probably easiest time to fast for women is the follicular phase. So the first 2 weeks of the cycle is like all the hormones are low. It's basically similar to how men are, right? So so probably one would do more intense fasting in the first 2 weeks, maybe skip ovulation time, and then do as you please in the luteal phase, just how your body wants it.
Yeah, I was just thinking maybe premenstrual they could try the 5-2 maybe.
Yeah, as long as they avoid some sensitive times of the cycle.
Interesting. Anything else to add in terms of fasting?
Well, so let's think about it. So let's talk about maybe the adrenals, the bile, and SIBO, because all of that is related. And, fasting could come also probably in that picture. So one of the reasons why people have chronic fatigue, it could be adrenal insufficiency. And then, of course, that might not be specifically a problem with adrenal glands, but with ANS that doesn't stimulate the adrenals enough. But at the end of the day, you basically end up with low cortisol. And when I was researching this, how is low cortisol maybe related to gut health and SIBO, is that cortisol is actually needed for gallbladder to recycle the bile and to concentrate the bile in the gallbladder. So if you don't have cortisol, you may end up having a lot of bile acids that are in your bloodstream, but they don't go back into the liver and they don't go into the gallbladder to kind of get ready for your next meal. And so what happens once we have the meal and the bile kind of flows into the gut, it's actually microbicidal. And it removes all the bacterial overgrowth from your upper intestine. And if you don't have that, then you will have bacterial overgrowth. And if you have bacterial overgrowth, then we know what happens with SIBO. So it's like those bacteria are going to eat your nutrients before you got the chance to absorb them. And it will produce metabolites, which are not necessarily good. It could have this endotoxin, going on if you have glyphosate selected bacterial pool. So all kinds of stuff is happening. And the way to fix it is actually to fix your adrenals so that you can again, have that natural cycle of the bile. And yeah, fasting is one of the ways. There may be other ways. For example, there is a relationship between bile and cortisol that goes both ways. So actually, bile acids, they do promote cortisol production. So it's like they influence both ways, right? So one could start maybe with a bile acid supplement to kind of jumpstart that. If fasting is a little bit too extreme, like you wouldn't start with that. Yeah, and I tried to start with fasting for SIBO and just like couldn't do it because I was low on cortisol, and probably you need cortisol to actually maintain your blood sugar. If you don't have that, then you can't go through with fasting. And another thing that I discovered just by looking through literature is that there is this supplement, berberine. Maybe you heard about it. It's becoming popular right now for various metabolic reasons. Berberine is also improving this whole system. It could improve gut health and improve bile recycling, and possibly, I don't know if it does something for cortisol, but berberine could also be a good starting point.
Interesting. Tetyana, you're the gift that keeps on giving. Anything else you want to add in regards to fasting and gut health?
Well, if people need encouragement, they can always look at my YouTube channel where I put the information about it as I discover new studies that help me optimize my own fasting regimen, because I'm not necessarily doing it perfectly. I'm still discovering. Maybe there are this nuance and that nuance that needs to be adjusted. And so that's where they can find that extra information.
Awesome. Great. And where can people find your YouTube channel?
Oh, it's YouTube, and it's at Personal Health Education, or the name of the channel itself is Tetyana's Personal Health Education. And I had to give that weird name because first it was just Personal Health Education, and you can't find it if you just type that in. All other things come up, and my channel is not even on the list, maybe because it's very new right now. But so I had to add that Tetyana's, and then you can easily locate it.
Awesome. And is there anywhere else you want to send people to find out more information?
I also have a private membership community where we go through all the science and we choose the topics that we want to study. And that's a lot of information that I found was because I was part of the community, part of trying to educate others and myself, or basically myself first, but then sharing it with other people. So, and that website is bbch.community. And people can look if they want to join that.
Awesome. Great. I'll make sure those links are in the show notes as well. Awesome. Tetyana, thank you so much for joining me today and sharing such valuable insights. And I've really enjoyed it. It's been great fun.
Yeah, me too. Thanks for having me.
So that's it from Tetyana and me for this week. But be sure to tune in same time, same place next week on the Radical Health Rebel podcast. Thanks for tuning in. Remember to give the show a rating and a review, and I'll see you next time.